Welcome back to the Ed Show. We continue to follow the breaking news. A grand jury here in New York has found no reasonable cause to indict NYPD officer Daniel Pantaleo in the death of Eric Garner. The grand jury was made up of 23 members with 12 votes needed for a decision. Sources familiar with the grand jury say that of the 23 members, 14 are white, 9 are non-white, and at least 5 members were black Americans. Now, for more, I am joined tonight by Congressman Al Green of Texas. Also with us, Reid, host of the Reid Report here on MSNBC, 2 o'clock Eastern Time. Congressman, your reaction to this, and is there a different reaction to this on Capitol Hill than maybe other news stories that we've seen that have dealt with police incidents?
Well, we are stunned, we're shocked, but we also believe that there is a remedy for this. I am of the opinion that we must first let people know that what has occurred today is something that is unacceptable. We also have to say to people that if we don't change this, what we've said to people, and more specifically the police officers, is that this is okay. We're saying you can do this. We cannot allow the perception to exist that you can do this. I would also add that we live in a world where it's not enough for things to be right, they must also look right. It doesn't look right for you to go behind closed doors and get a no bill in a case like this. These cases don't have to go to grand juries. They can be taken to probable cause hearings before a judge, and a judge can make a decision with the eyes of the world viewing. And once we get that kind of transparency, I believe we can get different results. But I would also add one more thing, Ed, if I may. We have a duty to bring this kind of behavior to an end. We cannot allow people in the world to see us continue to go through these kinds of deliberations and end up with no results that people can understand. Because we're not talking about a conviction, we're merely talking about an arrest. An arrest, a person being arrested. I don't know whether there will be a finding of guilt by a jury, but I do know that there's probable cause to arrest. That's what we're talking about.
Police procedures on the street, Congressman. Every department seems to be different. Some chokeholds are good in some places. Chokeholds are not good in New York City. Is there a federal move here on how people on the street should be approached? And an officer goes through training. What about the training? How could all of those officers involved in this videotape be trained to do what they did to this man and then defend it?
Well, they shouldn't have been trained to do what occurred. There should be some additional review of training. We believe that what the president is proposing is in line with what we need, and that is additional training for peace officers. I think that's a good thing. And let me also say that not all officers should be condemned. This is not a broad brush that we're painting with. We're talking about this incident now, and we want to make sure that this type of thing doesn't happen again. But I do concur with you, there needs to be more training, and I do also believe that if we do not take the time to talk to each other about these things rather than yell at each other, we're not going to make the progress that we need to get us beyond this debate. Too often we're yelling at each other now. People have gotten to the point that they don't want people to protest. Peaceful protest is a means by which people can express themselves. There is a move afoot in this country to prevent people who legitimately want to stand and protest peacefully from doing so. People who commit crimes ought to be prosecuted, but we've got to allow people to protest this kind of behavior.
Joy, what do you anticipate being the social reaction here?
Well, I think people are going to be, shocked, obviously, and a lot of people are going to be very angry. I, for one, I'm no longer shocked by these things. I have come to expect that when a police officer is in a situation like this, they will not be indicted, and if indicted, they will not be convicted. That is just my blanket belief, and that's because of the experience of seeing these cases unfold, not just year after year, but decade after decade. And Ed, you said something about training and policy. I think that the problem here is that neither training nor policy are particularly relevant in this particular case of Eric Garner, and that's because the policy of the NYPD says explicitly, not implicitly, that you may not use a chokehold. It very specifically describes what a chokehold is. And then the law and the potential charges against an officer who is put before a grand jury includes compression of the neck, which was also on the report that said this was a homicide by the medical examiner. So when you put it together, all the policies said that if you compress someone's throat or neck and therefore do a chokehold, it is against policy. Very clear. The law says that there is a criminal charge that attaches to actual compression of the neck that causes death. Very clear. If you can't get an indictment of a police officer with all of those facts and evidence and a videotape, that means you actually cannot get an indictment of a police officer in any situation, because this was the most easy, probably, or obvious kind of case for it, at least in the minds of the way the public reads it. And the reason that's important is because the police are the government. And the public has a right to be able to constrain its own government's ability to use deadly force against the people. And in this case, African Americans do not believe there is any constraining authority on any application of force, even deadly force, against black people. That is not tenable.
What you're describing and what you're putting out for our audience tonight, which is outstanding, it's going to take a heck of a lot more than a conversation to change what you just laid out. I mean, there is going to have to be some real structural changes about the do's and the don'ts of arresting officers.
And I think
so how do we do that?
I can tell you the history of the United States is that there was a time when police forces, no matter what was on the books, knew that they had impunity. And impunity is very important. It's not just about, I know a lot of police officers. I have friends that are police officers. My godbrother was an NYPD officer. Everyone is trained. Everyone understands their training. Everyone understands what they are supposed to not to do. But if you have the belief and the feeling that this prosecutor is our guy, we're going to be fine. The sense of impunity is something you can't train out of. And that what police officers are being taught by the law and the application of it is that prosecutors are their guy. And even if that isn't factually true, that's the perception. And the public perception is what makes law work. So I think what you have to do is look to the past. In the past, when local and state police were not applying the law to black people, the way that black people at least saw it being applied to white people, the federal government had to come in and superimpose order and law on them.
What about
and the federal government needs to come in here and needs to say that if there's deadly use of force against any citizen, then it will not be the local prosecutor that's your guy that's going to apply the law, and they're not going to be able to hide behind a grand jury. The federal government has a role to play. President Obama, the Justice Department, it's time for the federal government to weigh in.
Congressman Green, your response to that?
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. We do have to weigh in.
You think Republicans would go along with that on a federal level?
Well, I don't know whether they will, but I know that the right thing to do is to ask and to try to get it done. We can't continue to do what's being done. We cannot allow the perception to be that this is all right. It's okay to do what you've done, because that's what we're saying when we don't get an indictment, we don't get an arrest. And I also would add that, Ed, this kind of circumstance is something that we can change. We have to have the will. If a good prosecutor could have gotten a true bill in this case, a good prosecutor could do it. So if you have a dog that won't hunt, Ed, you got to get a new dog. We got to get prosecutors who are willing to fight for the rights of victims and not for the rights of people who are charged with the offense. The best defense attorney these victims, these peace officers have as a prosecutor.
Got to run. We're going to take